2026, China's Cyberspace Administration told ByteDance and Alibaba to cancel their Nvidia orders, not because Washington blocked the sale, because Beijing decided it no longer needed to buy. The export restriction regime that defined 4 years of semiconductor headlines did not produce this moment. The domestic chip shelf did. That reversal did not arrive suddenly. It was built, link by link, from the same chain of decisions everyone assumed was pointed the other way. From U.S. export controls to engineered workarounds to a Chinese sufficiency declaration, a sequence that ended with Beijing locking a door Washington thought it controlled. The pressure did not come from the export control list. It came from the domestic chip shelf. Trace the chain backward and every step runs opposite to what the architects of the restrictions expected. Here is the sequence, graded as it actually stands. 22. The Bureau of Industry and Security set performance thresholds on chip-to-chip interconnect bandwidth and total compute density. Those thresholds blocked Nvidia's flagship data center accelerators from entering China outright. That is confirmed. The rules are public. Nvidia's response is also confirmed and on the public record. The company engineered step-down variants calibrated precisely to clear the thresholds. The A800, then the H800, then successive downgraded lines, culminating in the export-compliant accelerator, now known as the RTX Pro 6000D, and the export-compliant successor that followed. Years of product engineering, each cycle targeted at keeping 1 foot inside the legal threshold, while preserving as much capability as the rules allowed. Chinese hyperscalers bought them. ByteDance, Alibaba, and their peers had no domestic alternative that came close to the performance floor needed for large model training and inference at commercial scale. This is confirmed across multiple reported fiscal quarters of Nvidia revenue exposure and procurement data. China's largest artificial intelligence spenders were buying foreign hardware that had been deliberately degraded by foreign law and was sold by a company operating under legal constraints on what it could offer them. That is the situation as of roughly late 2024. Nvidia retaining meaningful revenue, Chinese firms structurally dependent on a constrained supplier. Now comes the link where the expectation turns over, because this is where the chain reverses. The controls were imposed to limit Chinese artificial intelligence capability by restricting chip performance. The unintended result was to fix a ceiling on what Nvidia could sell and hold it there while Chinese producers aimed. Without export controls, Nvidia's frontier advances every generation. The target keeps moving. With them, the target is pinned. Bolted onto a rival's car does not make your own car fast, but it does tell every engineer in your garage exactly how fast they have to get, and it holds that number still while they work. Chinese chip programs, Huawei's Ascend line among the most reported, did not have to match the H100 or the B200 class. They had to match a chip that U.S. policy was simultaneously holding down. That is a different and far more tractable engineering problem. Reported benchmark claims from domestic producers began to reference the downgraded Nvidia variants specifically, not the Frontier class. Independent verification of parity at production scale has not been confirmed. The claim originates with Chinese producers and has been cited by analysts who note the underlying data is thin, but the claim did not need to be independently verified to become politically useful. Once the performance claim existed, the Chinese state had an instrument it had previously lacked. Substitution mandate that did not require admitting inferiority. If the product Beijing was ordering its companies to replace had already been degraded by U.S. policy, the assertion that a domestic chip matches it is far easier to make credible to the companies being told to comply. That is the pivot the whole chain turns on. The hobbled variant gave Chinese regulators a rhetorically defensible threshold. The restriction did not freeze the target, it handed it over. In May 2026, China's Cyberspace Administration ordered ByteDance and Alibaba to halt purchases of the export-compliant accelerator and cancel outstanding orders. Beijing separately added the follow-on export-compliant variant to its banned commodities list, framing the action as a sovereign procurement standard rather than a retaliatory tariff. That framing is reported. Deliberation and the full enforcement mechanism are not yet on the public record, and that gap is where the chain's durability is genuinely uncertain. The reported order targets 2 named companies and 2 named product lines. Whether it carries penalties, how it interacts with existing contracts, and whether it applies to procurement routed through intermediaries are questions without public answers. A single administrative directive is not the same thing as a durable import prohibition. The line between political signaling and structural policy change is exactly what the next procurement cycle will reveal. If ByteDance and Alibaba quietly resume imports through third-party channels once the political moment passes, the reversal is theater. If they do not, if domestic chip orders scale to fill the gap at the workloads these companies actually run, the chain is structural. Both joints are under pressure simultaneously, and neither has been stress-tested at scale. if domestic chip performance is real and the ban is enforced. It bends if either assumption fails. The downstream consequences of the fifth link, assuming enforcement holds, are inferred rather than confirmed, but they are worth naming plainly. Nvidia loses the residual revenue stream it preserved through 4 years of product engineering workarounds. Chinese domestic chip producers gain a protected procurement lane with the country's largest artificial intelligence spenders as captive customers, and the export control regime loses the implicit leverage that came from China's continuing dependency. The country that was supposed to be shut out of advanced silicon has now shut the door on the product that was the workaround. The party restricting Nvidia's China market is Beijing, acting on a claim of domestic sufficiency, not Washington, acting on national security grounds. 4 years ago, the chain started with a U.S. decision about what Nvidia could sell. Engineered around it, Chinese chipmakers aimed at the resulting ceiling, and in May 2026, Beijing used that ceiling to justify ordering its own largest technology companies to stop buying the chip Nvidia had spent years modifying to stay legal. The export-compliant accelerator, a chip engineered specifically to thread a legal needle and preserve a market relationship, is now the chip China officially declined. The move, designed to limit Chinese artificial intelligence access, set the performance bar that Chinese producers had to clear, and clearing it is what gave Beijing the instrument to shut the door itself. Washington drew the line. Beijing walked through it and locked the gate behind them. Watch the next procurement disclosures from ByteDance and Alibaba. Chip orders scale to fill the Nvidia gap. The chain is structural and the reversal is real. If the downgraded imports resume through other channels, it was a signal, and the chain has one more link to add. If you track where industrial policy and semiconductor strategy intersect, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel follows the chain wherever it leads.